of that is breathing through the nose.
Mhm. Well, thank you for all of that information. That was wonderful. It's so
Sure.
awesome to listen to you. You're so passionate about everything. So I'm going to kind of break down a little bit of what you said, different little tidbits I want to talk a little bit more about. So when we're talking about, those shorter chest breaths,
Yes.
let's talk, we have a lot of patients. I have a lot of adult patients that come in with stress and anxiety and panic attacks. Let's talk about how, reteaching their breathing or Buteyko breathing can actually help decrease that.
Sure. When you look at breathing, we have to look at it from the perspective of three dimensions. One is the biochemistry of the breath. I already pointed on carbon dioxide and the role it plays. But individuals prone to anxiety and panic disorder, they can have an overly strong reaction to the feeling of suffocation. And when we are working with those individuals, we have to be very careful, because in order to improve the biochemistry of breathing, we have individuals deliberately slow down their breathing and reduce their minute ventilation to allow carbon dioxide to increase slightly in the blood. And the premise here is to reduce the sensitivity of the body to carbon dioxide by exposing the body to higher CO2 in the arterial blood. I think it's a tremendous method, because as long as an individual has panic disorder and anxiety, and when they do have a strong alarm towards suffocation, that feeling of suffocation is feeding back into their conditions. It's very helpful to expose these individuals with a teaspoon of suffocation to decondition them from a psychological perspective, but also from a physiological perspective. Slow breathing to achieve a normal minute ventilation, a normal volume of air per minute, is necessary in order to help restore normal carbon dioxide levels and in order to reduce the feeling of suffocation. So that's one. The second aspect is that fast breathing, stress, anxiety, and panic disorder will contribute to fast breathing, and fast breathing, in turn, contributes back into stress, anxiety, and panic disorder. If we are breathing fast as human beings, especially during rest, it's synonymous with fight and flight. Throughout our evolution, whenever we had a fight or flight situation, an emergency situation, we always breathed fast and upper chest. So it's the fight and flight situation that's causing the upper chest and fast breathing, but fast and upper chest breathing is feeding back into the fight or flight. If you are in a situation of stress and anxiety, always work to slow down your breathing. And the question here is, can the body be in a state of stress and anxiety if you exhibit slow, light breathing using the diaphragm? So that's the second point. The research on that was only discovered back in March of 2017. Scientists at Stanford Medical School, they identified a new structure in the brain, in the locus coeruleus, and they said that this structure is spying on your breathing. So if you breathe fast, there is a structure in the brain which is sensing that your respiration is fast, that the respiratory rate is fast, and this structure in the brain will relay signals of agitation to the rest of the brain, but also you're more likely to be aroused from sleep. Now, this also ties in then with sleep apnea. And when we are talking about anxiety, high stress, and depression, ask these individuals, what is their sleep quality like? I have people coming in with depression. I ask them, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? They often will tell me that they wake up feeling exhausted. Now, you could ask the question, is it the depression which is causing their exhaustion, or is it poor sleep quality which is causing exhaustion over months and years, which in turn is increasing anxiety, which in turn is generating depression? We can't isolate depression alone. We can't isolate breathing alone. We cannot isolate sleep alone. If your breathing is off, if your breathing is fast, hard, upper chest, you're more likely to have light sleep, especially breathing through the mouth. Mouth breathers have light sleep. Mouth breathers are more prone to have resistance or to have restriction or turbulent airflow as a result, because the architecture of the airway is more narrowed as a result of mouth breathing. So obstructive sleep apnea will increase, hypopneas will increase, snoring will increase because of hard, fast mouth breathing. If your sleep is disrupted, your emotions are disrupted. But also if the mind is agitated, it's difficult to fall asleep. Now, we know that 67% of people with obstructive sleep apnea, they also have insomnia. In one study, looking at the similarities of symptoms here, the symptoms of insomnia are cognitive impairment, irritability, and fatigue. But the same symptoms are also present in obstructive sleep apnea: cognitive impairment, irritability, and fatigue. So if we are working with people with sleep disorder breathing, we also need to look at insomnia. Are they light sleepers? Are they having difficulty falling asleep? Are they waking up during their night, during their sleep? And the phenotype of sleep apnea has changed dramatically since 2015, that it's not just an anatomical issue. There are now 4 phenotypes, meaning that there's 4 different characteristics of individuals presenting with sleep disorder breathing with obstructive sleep apnea. One of those characteristics is an anatomical issue, which is called peak crit. And peak crit will refer to the suction pressure at which the airway collapses. But the second phenotype is loop gain. And loop gain is the instability of breathing during sleep. You measure it by measuring breath hold time, but you reduce high loop gain by practicing breathing re-education. A third phenotype is arousal threshold. How likely is the individual to wake from sleep, from their deep stages of sleep, in response to resistance of their breathing? It's in an ideal situation, deep sleep is key, and light sleep is not good. In a 2018 paper, the risk of mortality as a result of obstructive sleep apnea, the phenotype with the greatest risk of mortality was individuals with low arousal threshold, individuals who were light sleeper. It wasn't the guy who was knocked out and who is stopping breathing for a minute and a half that his blood oxygen saturation drops down to 70%, 60%. He wasn't the high risk. It was the individual with mild to moderate obstructive sleep apnea that weren't desaturating very much, that didn't have a high AHI, but they had a greater prevalence of hypopneas, meaning that they had constant sleep fragmentation all night long because they were waking up out of deep sleep due to the slightest resistance to their breathing. The fourth phenotype is upper airway recruitment, and this refers to the functioning of the upper airway dilator muscles. By the way, when we breathe through the nose, we're more likely to breathe using the diaphragm. When we breathe low, using abdominal breathing, it increases lung volume, and when there's an increase to lung volume, there is a stiffening of the throat. So the throat is less likely to collapse when you breathe through your nose and when you breathe low. Now, we know that when we hit 40, we start putting a few pounds, a few pounds on the belly. It's not just that, of course, as obesity increases, the AHI can worsen. That's normal. People will often say, well, there's fat deposits on the tongue, and the tongue is occupying more space in the mouth and encroaching on the airway. Or there's fat pads on the throat, and this is making the airway narrow. But we also have to consider the effect of the fat on the belly, because belly fat is impairing the movement of the diaphragm breathing muscle, which in turn is causing more fast and upper chest breathing, which in turn is causing a greater likelihood of the throat collapsing. Okay, so I'm going to come back to anxiety and panic disorder. It's kind of in a circle. I'm doing a circle here, but I'll get around to it. So the biochemistry of breathing is very important, addressing that. How can you normalize carbon dioxide and also to reduce the fear response towards suffocation by giving people a teaspoon of the feeling of air hunger? The second aspect is the biomechanics, because our main breathing muscle, the diaphragm, is not just for respiration. There is bidirectional feedback from the brain to breathing, but also from the breathing back to the brain. That when we are breathing deep, using the diaphragm, the mind is calmer. When we breathe slow, the mind is calmer. And when we breathe using the diaphragm, our breathing is slower. But deep breathing doesn't mean big breathing. The issue is that oftentimes breath practitioners, you go to a yoga studio, and all too often you will hear the yoga instructor is emphasizing the importance of diaphragmatic breathing, taking the air deep into the lungs, but you are hearing people breathe during the process. You shouldn't hear people breathe during rest, because if you were hearing them breathe, there's an increase to their minute ventilation. This in turn is causing a greater loss of carbon dioxide from the blood through the lungs. So in the process of the yoga instructor, now not all of course, but many, the process of teaching yoga with the emphasis on the biomechanics of breathing, the biochemistry is sacrificed in the process. A third pillar of breathing is cadence breathing. And this is really applicable also to persons with anxiety, stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, and depression. Looking at slowing down your respiration, slowing down the respiratory rate to 5.5 to 6 breaths per minute for periods of time during the day in order to stimulate what's called baroreceptors or pressure receptors in the major blood vessels, in order to increase vagal tone, in order to increase heart rate variability, and in order to increase the synchronicity of breathing with the heart rate, which is called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. In other words, individuals with anxiety, stress, PTSD, depression, they will often exhibit low heart rate variability. We need the time between heartbeats to be in random, but also to be in rhythm. And there's a synchronicity of the relationship between the timing of our heartbeats and our respiration. It is true that our heart will exhibit an influence to our breathing, but our breathing has an even greater influence on the heart rate. If any of your listeners, if they identify or locate their pulse, and then if they monitor the speed of their heart rate as they are breathing in and as they are breathing out. On the breath in, the time between heartbeats should be shorter. And on the breath out, the time between heartbeats should be longer. This in turn then is that the heart rate is variable. And good heart rate variability is a very good indicator of normal autonomic functioning. But individuals whose bodily systems are disturbed by stress, they can have reduced heart rate variability. And in order to help the bodily system disturbed by stress, cadence breathing to 6 breaths per minute is ideal. So when I work with somebody with breathing, I'm not just interested in how do they breathe when they sit in front of me. That's not enough. I'm interested, how are they breathing when they walk down the street? How are they breathing when they get into stress? How are they breathing during their sleep? In other words, it's their everyday breathing that's key. The person prone to panic disorder, it's not the breathing during the panic attack that's the problem. The problem is their everyday breathing. Their everyday breathing is off. They are on the verge of symptoms. And all it does is take a minor event to push them into symptoms. Driving a car or going into a crowded place. Human beings, we need the resilience to be able to cope with what life throws at us. And of course, life can throw very difficult situations. I'm not saying that breathing is the answer to everything, but I am saying that through the breath, it helps to bring a calmness and a stillness of the mind. It helps to increase focus, concentration, and memory. And by the way, nasal breathing is more likely to improve memory than mouth breathing. And there are papers on that. Sleep. And, these are traits that we need to survive as human beings in today's modern life. I don't know how I could have survived adequately without having the information of breathing through the nose, slow breathing using the diaphragm, and getting a good night's sleep using breathing exercises. It has helped me enormously. And we have seen thousands of individuals over the years, it bringing benefits to them. Of course, it's never going to be 100%. The compliance is always an issue. We're trying to get people to bring it into their way of life. Nothing is perfect, but let's try do something about it.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about, because I know that you have a book on, nasal breathing and increasing athletic performance. Because
Yes.
I'll have a lot of patients that come in, you know, and I talk to them about the importance of breathing, you know, nasally and breathing in and out
Yeah.
easily. And they're like, oh, well, you know, my football coach always said breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. So, or when I, you know, go running, I always breathe out through my mouth. So let's talk a little bit on the importance of that. I feel like people know to breathe in through their nose, but don't see the problem with breathing out through their mouth.
Sure. Mouth breathing, the problem with breathing out through the mouth is a greater loss of moisture and heat from the exhale breath. That when we breathe in, your nose expends an energy in conditioning the air to the right temperature and to the right humidity. And you've got this moist and warm air coming into the lungs. And this is favorable for oxygen transfer to take place from the lungs into the blood. Now, on the expiration, your nose is trapping the heat and moisture from the exhale breath. So if you breathe in through your nose and you breathe out through your nose is able to recover energy expended by the body. You're less likely to be dehydrated. There's less trauma on the upper airways. We want our mouth moist. We want the throat moist. We don't want the mouth dry. As a dental hygienist, I'm sure you will see that when you're looking into the mouths of mouth breathers, as I was, you're going to see greater incidence of dental cavities, of gum disease, because how can you have adequate dental hygiene if you're breathing through your mouth all the time? And runners often have dry mouths, especially if they're running for a longer distance, and they are more prone to dental issues, dental health issues. Okay. Now, I understand that, yeah, when you switch from mouth to nose breathing, it's more difficult at the start because there's a feeling of air hunger. But if you look at a paper by George Dallam, Dallam, now I wrote an article on this, that if you go to oxygenadvantage.com and if you click on science, when you click on science, then you'll see a number of different topics, but one of those topics is nasal breathing during running. When you first switch to nose breathing during running, the intensity of the air hunger is a little bit stronger because, of course, your nose is a smaller entry than the mouth. So there's an increase of carbon dioxide in the blood during nose breathing. But carbon dioxide is not that bad. You know, it performs really important functions. If you run with your mouth closed, you have a greater tendency to increase oxygen uptake in the blood. There's less trauma to the airways. You're more likely to have a greater oxygen delivery to the tissues. You're able to stay aerobically for longer. The body is built to stay aerobic. We can only stay anaerobically for short periods of time, and sometimes fatigue will set in. But the body can handle aerobic, in an aerobic state, the body can stay in for a much longer time than an anaerobic state. So for ideal optimization, for oxygen uptake, for oxygen delivery, for bronchodilation, for recovery post-physical exercise, it's very important to nose breathe. But I do understand at the start, it's more difficult, but this is where we need people to be persistent. Stay breathing through your nose and the air hunger diminishes over time. And if you look at Dallam's paper, a number of things about it. He got recreational athletes, to breathe through their nose during all physical exercise for a period of 6 months. And then he tested them. He tested them breathing through the nose versus breathing through the mouth using a graded exercise test. Individuals who were breathing through their nose for a period of 6 months, they were able to achieve a 100% work rate intensity nasal breathing versus mouth breathing. The pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood was 44 millimeter of mercury pressure during nose breathing, 40 millimeters of mercury pressure during mouth breathing. In other words, these individuals coped with higher levels of CO2, which is good because there's a greater oxygen delivery to the tissues. The fraction of expired oxygen was less with nasal breathing, meaning that the body was able to utilize the oxygen better that was coming in. The respiratory rate was 39 breaths per minute nose breathing, 49 breaths per minute mouth breathing, but ventilation was 22% less breathing through the nose. Now, ventilation, if you can do 100% of your work rate intensity with 22% less ventilation, that's a tremendous savings in terms of economy. Because if you are working your breathing muscles too hard, your breathing is inefficient, and also there's a greater consumption of oxygen going to support the breathing muscles. So I would say that there is no comparison, nose breathing versus mouth breathing. Now, I understand when we work with an elite athlete, I tend to have them do 50% nose breathing and 50% mouth breathing. And also when you're dealing with individuals with sports, we look at the nasal cavity. So about 65% of individuals have a deviated septum. So this is the line dividing the left side of the nose to the right is crooked. And as a result, one side of the nose breathing is impaired. So I'll often have individuals wear a nasal dilator during sports. So they keep their mouth closed, but they wear a nasal dilator. And also individuals with nasal valve collapse. So they gently prise their nostrils. Doesn't make a difference to the airflow that's coming into the nose. And if it makes a difference, a nasal dilator during physical exercise will allow you to maintain exercise intensity with nasal breathing. Now, the other thing is, Brittany, is controlled pause, or with the oxygen advantage, we call it the Bolt score. Functional breathing is when the Bolt score is above 25 seconds. That's body oxygen level test. It's simple. It's a very simple test. You can do it, but any of your listeners can do it. You just get a timer, take a normal breath in and out through your nose during rest, hold your nose, and time it in seconds until you feel the first definite desire to breathe or the first involuntary contraction of your breathing muscles. If your breath hold time is above 25 seconds, there is an 89% chance that this functional breathing isn't present. But if your breath hold time as an adult, if it's less than 25 seconds, breathing is suboptimal and there's room for improvement. Now, 80% of people with anxiety and panic disorder have dysfunctional breathing patterns. Not my words. This is what the literature is showing. Now, you think of all of your patients with anxiety and stress, high stress, depression, etc. 80% of those are having breathing pattern disorders. But breathing is often overlooked in terms of the treatment of these individuals. Cognitive behavioral therapy is wonderful, but it's not going to change respiratory physiology. We need to do CBT, but we also need to look at sleep, and we also need to look at breathing. Because if you can change respiratory physiology, whether it's for the mind, whether it's for sleep, or whether it's for sports or craniofacial growth, it can impart those benefits.
What about, because my patients, most of them get sent to me for, they have a tongue thrust, sent to me by an orthodontist or whatever the case may be. So they come in here, me wanting me to do tongue exercises with them. And then I start to do breathing exercises with them. And, I explain to them, the importance of nasal breathing and tongue rest posture and how, if you breathe more through your mouth, your tongue posture more than likely is going to rest low.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about, the relationship between mouth breathing and tongue posture?
Yeah, of course. Ideally, we want 3/4 of the tongue resting and the roof of the mouth pressed against the palate, but we don't want the tip of the tongue resting against the top front teeth. We want it resting on the ridge there. I can't remember what is the rugae. I can't remember what the ridge is just before the top front teeth. Now, of course, you can't have your tongue resting in the correct resting posture if you are breathing through the mouth. And I will always ask my own students to come in and I say, okay, I want you to have 3/4 of your tongue resting in the roof of the mouth. Now I would like you to open your mouth and breathe through it with your tongue resting in the correct tongue resting posture. And they say, I can't, of course, because if you need to breathe through your mouth, you have to drop your tongue to allow the air to come into the mouth, into the lungs. When children come into me, the first thing I do is I go through the importance of nasal breathing with them. And I talk about why breathe through the nose. The face, you look intelligent. I never say to the child, you'll have a crook that back and you're going to be, I never talk about that. I say, listen, I said, we want you to have a wonderful looking face. I want you to look intelligent. And if you're going around with your mouth open, it just doesn't look right. And I say, who goes around with the mouth open? What animals? A dog. Yeah, a dog goes around with the mouth open. But that doesn't mean humans have to go around with the mouth open. Humans, we have to have our mouths closed with the tongue resting in the roof of the mouth. Our sleep and our sports. And I always want to motivate these kids, getting them breathing through the nose. But when you're working with children, it's not just enough to work with the kids. We have to work with the parents. Because if the parents get it, then the kids will get it. So what I do is 10 minutes into the class with me, I get them taped up and I have them wearing the tape across their lips. And the reason being is because I want to see, can these kids cope with nasal breathing? So when I have them for 40 and 50 minutes, well, it's usually an hour, they're taped up for most of that time. And I work with small groups of kids, 6 kids together. All kids are taped up, and sometimes we'll have the parents tape up, and sometimes I'm happy with that as well. That can be very effective. So the parents are taped up, the kids are taped up, and we put both the kids and the parents through the exercises. I want to try and find out, why does the child have the mouth open? Why are they breathing through it? If it's the front of the nose, if it's rhinitis, which affects probably about 40% of kids, we do the nose unblocking exercise to open up the nose so that they can breathe through it. And then I have the child do walking with the mouth closed. Are they able to use their nose while walking? Then I have them do running. Then I have them do the steps exercise to help address the breathing pattern disorders. And the steps exercise is, take an over breath in and out through your nose, pinch your nose, hold your nose, and walk around holding the breath. And if the child is 4 or 5 years of age, I want them to try and reach about 40 to 50 paces on a breath hold. Now, it never happens at the start, so they build it up over time, about 10 extra paces each week. If the child is 6 or 7 years of age, I want them to try and get between 50 and 60 paces. If they're 8 and 9 years of age, I try and get them up to about 70 paces. And if they're above 10 years of age, I try to get them to 80 paces. Okay. Children with anxiety, children with asthma, often, they're more common to have a breathing pattern disorder. So we have more work to do with these kids. And if you have asthma, you don't just have asthma. As a kid growing up, I also had chronic nasal obstruction. My sleep is impacted. I was in that state of fight or flight all the time. So I look at children that I want to change their breathing pattern, but I also want to change the habit. And what I introduced a few years ago is these kids, when they are watching television during the day, or sometimes, they have mom's or dad's iPhone or the iPad or whatever, I have them wearing the tape. So they wear a paper tape across their lips during the day for a half an hour to an hour during the day, because it's not just enough to give them breathing exercises. I want to change the brain, in that the brain realizes that the nose is for breathing. So neuroplasticity. And we have the kids wearing the tape during wakefulness. And during sleep, we brought out a new tape. It's called Myo tape. And the reason that I brought it up because I was asking kids to tape up for many, many years, but always at the back of the mind, I was trying to weigh it up. What happens if something goes wrong here? And luckily enough, we didn't have an issue. We had one issue with one kid in Poland, that the child vomited during sleep, but was able to remove the tape, and it was high risk. So I was trying different strategies, bringing the tape underneath the chin, either side, wrapping the tape around the mouth, getting the lip closure, but nothing was really working. So then kinesio tape, we started with kinesio tape, using it, stretching it by 20%, having a hole in the middle of the kinesio tape where the mouth fits. And by stretching the kinesio tape by 20% and by surrounding the lips, I don't have one with me, but surrounding the lips, the elastic tension of the tape brings lip closure. So during wakefulness then, the child can wear the Myo tape because the child can communicate. Like if I tape up a kid and I say to the parents, now I want you to go home and I want you to tape up your child for a half an hour or an hour per day. Well, during that time, the child can't even talk. So it's almost that the child is in solitary confinement for the half an hour to an hour per day. So the tape, I think, is even doing something else with the muscles surrounding the mouth, the tension and bringing those muscles, I can never pronounce it, the orbicularis. So I think it's doing some impact there, but I think more so it's the reminder to the kid. If you see your child there, and I know it's it was only when I had my own child that I realized the effort involved in getting children switching from mouth to nose breathing. So I know it takes work, but you see your kid and you're saying, okay, lips together. And the next thing is 10 minutes later, you're seeing them out, lips together. But if you're wearing something like Myo tape or kinesio tape, that the elastic tension is keeping the lips together. If the child forgets about nose breathing, and if the child opens the mouth, the tape automatically reminds them because it's bringing the lips together with the elastic tension.
Right.
So there's a training tool there as well. And of course, then during sleep, we have to get these kids breathing through the nose during sleep. What happens if they have appliances in their mouth? You know, like the appliances will work during sleep when the mouth is closed. There's no point in an appliance in the mouth and the mouth is open and the appliance is falling out. So, you know, the appliances sometimes can be bulky, and this is where the tape can come in. So yeah, so we did two things. We brought out, I launched all of the children's program completely free of charge. And so we put all of the videos up on YouTube. Every exercise that we work with kids, we put it up there. So it's totally free. So that's number one. I also wanted to put out resources in terms of articles for sleep, for craniofacial development, for the importance of functional dentistry to help improve the airway of these kids, and then the tape itself. So that was all recent stuff that we did in the last 1 or 2 months.
Yeah, I just actually recommended the tape to one of my patients yesterday. I love it because, again, the lips are free. So I always felt, you know, telling a parent, you know, put a piece of tape over their kid's mouth. I felt the same way. It's like, I know the benefits are good, but it doesn't feel right to be telling you that. So I absolutely love the idea of the Myo tape. So thank you very much for that.
The other thing, well, it was a case of necessity. We had to have something. The other thing, Brittany, is we have a few dentists who are our instructors, and they're in front of their own peers because they had recommended that their patients tape up. And the patients then reported, even though the dentist had the very best of intentions for the patient, didn't the patient's parent then report the dentist to the dental boards?
Right.
And these dentists now are in front of the dental boards. And we are going through the literature, sending them the few papers of the importance of taping of the lips, showing that there is precedence here, that it's past ethics. You know, and it's not a nice situation to be in. So that's also from that perspective, I think it's very important that, you know, they're not just, of course, the risk to the child, the perception, the media. So if I was doing interviews, sometimes journalists will say, oh my God, you're taping them out of the kids. And I say, well, we are bringing the lips together, and our emphasis is not uncovering the mouth of the child. And because, you know, perception can mean a lot as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Well, now nobody has to worry about it because you developed the perfect
Thanks.
Thank you so much for all this information. It has been so great. I am so excited to get this episode launched so that everybody can listen.
Great.
Do you have any, you know, last words you want to leave with the listeners before we wrap up here?
All I will say is this: never underestimate the benefits of nasal breathing. The nose is not just the two holes in the face. It can make a tremendous difference to your quality of life. Yes, it's a habit. You know, nasal obstruction can be resolved, and I would say really stick with it. It's not just enough to breathe through the nose, but it's also important to address breathing pattern disorders. And you know, I'm always grateful for the dental community, for dental hygienists, for myofunctional therapists, because they get it. And that's really important, because for 20 years, you know, in my books and getting the information out there, I often felt that it was a topic which was so important, but yet was overlooked. And I'm delighted to see that there's really an increased awareness of this in the last few years. So I'm very happy about that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much, Patrick, and we'll definitely have to have you on again soon. This has been absolutely amazing.
Good stuff. Thanks very much, Brittany.
Thank you. Everybody, say goodbye to Patrick. Bye, Patrick. Thank you for listening to today's episode of I Spy with my MyOI. If you want to hear more about these episodes, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or feel free to contact me at bsierra.omt@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe as well and let us know of any subject or guest speaker you'd like to hear from. Help spread the word by sharing today's episode on your social media page. You can find me on Facebook at CT Oral Facial Myology and Instagram handle CT_oral facial_myology. Everybody have a wonderful day.